Sure. So I started my career in learning and development at Google when the company had just around 1,500 employees and was expanding from 5 US-based offices to 12 international offices. It was definitely a different era for the company. And during that time, I learned a lot about how people learn differently across different cultures, the role that learning and development and leadership development plays in organization success. And from there, I decided to pursue my graduate studies in organizational psychology. I worked for Mercer Delta Consulting, which was an organizational and leadership consulting practice within the Mercer ecosystem, primarily working with leadership in large Global 100 organizations on developing their leadership team capabilities, understanding people analytics for large scale organization and strategic change. And then from there, I worked with Schaefer Consulting, a small consulting firm based in Connecticut that was one of the early developers of the workout methodology that was used at GE. And there I really learned about the importance of the ability of teams, line teams, to implement strategy and organization change, learning and development, and leadership development through rapid cycle organizational change initiatives that fed into larger, longer term strategic impact for a company. From there, I then worked across the Middle East and Europe, doing organization and leadership development consulting work with companies that were based both in Europe and the Middle East, with a big emphasis on developing the capabilities of local talent to take on leadership roles in companies where they were depending heavily on expat talent. And that really informed a lot of my understanding on the role that cross-cultural components and culture plays in how we think about leadership in companies that are today almost all global. And then from there, I've been back in Silicon Valley, working with a lot of different companies on rapid scale, rapid scale growth, organization scaling, and building healthy organizations where people can achieve great things.
So you've done just a little bit of stuff here and there. That's impressive. And Google at 1,500 people. So you were there when like all the books that we have from how Google has done it is created. That was from that kind of that time, that era of time when you were there, which is that's mind blowing.
Yes, it really was a very formative time for the company in terms of thinking about building an innovative, healthy, scalable organization from the very beginning in super innovative ways. And one of the exciting things is that I had the opportunity to go back to Google X and at Waymo many, many years later in building that organization to what it is today.
And now Waymo is expanded now to Silicon Valley. I've taken a couple of them, just crazy. And you, if you really think about your impact in all these different companies, you know, you're not the person that built the product or whatever, but it's you built the leaders that are actually having the most amount of leverage. And that's just, I don't know. I would be extremely proud if I was you to be able to say that you were a part of all these places because you really made an impact. All right, I will stop glazing so much, and I'm gonna get into some specifics. And let's start first with, like you just mentioned, you've worked at Google, Waymo, Responsive. What are the common traits of companies that build great leaders?
Sure. I think that one of the most important aspects of building great leadership for a company is really putting an emphasis on the role that the executive and leadership team plays in cascading behaviors through an organization. One thing that you see where companies make mistakes is that they think about leadership as or manager development as something that comes from the bottom up or something that is for a specific level within the organization. And really culture, business performance, strategy implementation, all cascades from leadership down. So if a company has limited resources, it really needs to put the focus on not just developing leadership capabilities for the executive team or their relationship with the board, but ensuring that their behaviors are visible, consistent, and cascade through the organization from their direct reports all the way down to the individual contributors in the company.
And that sounds like common sense. Why do you think that companies, maybe because I'm in HR, it sounds like common sense, but let me ask a question to that, where if you're cascading your behaviors and cascading what you want as successful traits, why are people not doing that when that seems like common sense to me?
I think because the leadership level in organization, there are limited mechanisms for enforcing behaviors or embedding behaviors in the way that leaders function. And so once one person is in a leadership role, especially if they're in the executive team, there are limited mechanisms for that person's behavior to be influenced by others in the leadership team. And so to the extent to which the leadership team itself can be self-enforcing in terms of determining which behaviors, which competencies, or which attributes align with the culture code of that company, with the values, the mission, and the vision of the company, and then the behaviors that need to be elicited both among themselves and other people in the organization in order to achieve the business strategy. That's really where the most important investment takes place.
So it sounds like common sense, but it's not that easy. And so that's why you don't have a lot of rubber that's able to meet the road to make it happen, it sounds like then. Okay.
Exactly, exactly. And that those enforcement mechanisms within the leadership team are particularly challenging unless you have an outside facilitator, an outside coach, or you have a competency model or leadership attributes that are very well understood by each of the members of the leadership team and that they hold each other accountable to those behaviors.
So on that note, the executive team says we need a leadership development program. Go figure it out, Brian. Go figure it out, Michelle. Many times at all the different types of companies, leadership programs, they sound great on paper, but they don't really seem to move the needle. They don't create the impact. What do you think the biggest gap is between the leadership theory and the actual real world leadership that's just not connecting?
Sure. So the most effective organizational development and then in turn learning and development initiatives are directly aligned with the strategic objectives of the company. And to the extent to which a leadership development program or an organizational development initiative can be aligned and mapped out to the business strategy, the greater the impact will be because those behaviors then map to performance. Being able to connect those leadership attributes to the behaviors and then ultimately to the results that that functional leader needs to be executing on, the greater the chance of success for the company. And if a company can then cascade that again through the entire company, through clear understanding of OKRs, objectives and key results, and linking those to the KPIs that have been defined for company performance, the greater the likelihood of success.
Okay, so I'm doing it right. I have OKRs. My objective is to get $100 million in revenue. KRs are whatever. I don't even need to get into the details of that. You're saying that the leadership program, okay, what I'm trying to get is what does that look like to connect what you want out of the leadership program to the OKR? Can you give me an example of what that actually looks like then?
Sure. So, for instance, if a company has measurable results that they are attempting to achieve, which is that most companies have measurable strategic objectives, right? They are trying to expand into a new market. They are trying to capture a certain number of customers. They are trying to scale headcount so that they can build new products or scale operations across different geographies. Those are all measurable that have measurable impact, right, on the company's success. So the extent to which leadership behaviors and in turn employee behaviors can be linked to those metrics, the greater chance for success because those behaviors are defeating into how that person's performance is defined.
So as I'm building out my OKRs for the following year, would I then say, here's the behaviors that are going to allow us to get there? Is that what people do? Or is that what you could do? Or like, how are people determining what those behaviors are, I guess?
Sure. So in that regard, having a learning and development uh, leader within the organization who understands how different behaviors and different competencies map out to the implementation of strategy or the execution of strategy is crucial. And so mapping behaviors to results or to the behaviors of teams and then in turn to results is essential for successful leadership development and then successful strategy implementation.
On the flip side, so we just talked about kind of the executive leadership team, but on the early end, so I'm early in my career and I'm thinking about how do I develop my leadership skills? Because one day I want to be an executive. What would you say, or what's your recommendation for some of the first things they should start doing today?